Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to be talking about something a little bit different today, something that maybe is on your mind. It is bankruptcy, and specifically, we're going to look at it through the lens of homeownership.
Oh, interesting.
And the material that we're looking at is a complete book on bankruptcy by Peter Francis Geraci
Of Geraci Law?
of Geraci Law.
Yes.
And I have to say, before we get started, for anybody who's listening, this is just for information and it's not legal advice.
Right.
Attorney advertising past results don't guarantee similar outcomes. Listening to this doesn't make you a client of Geraci Law
Right.
or any of their lawyers. And what we talk about is general and might not be right for you.
Mm.
If you need real advice about your money or bankruptcy,
Right.
you should talk to a lawyer directly.
For sure.
Geraci Law actually does free consultations, so that's great. They can help you make good choices.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so reach out to them if you want to learn more.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into this. I'm looking at this book, and it's actually pretty reassuring. It doesn't paint this picture that if you file for bankruptcy, you automatically lose your house.
Right.
There's ways that it can help you keep your home.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that bankruptcy equals losing your home, and it's just not true. Especially if you look at Chapter 7 bankruptcy, there are ways that it can actually help you keep your house while eliminating a lot of that debt that might be weighing you down.
So what are those ways? What are the conditions that you have to meet in order to be able to keep your home if you file for Chapter 7?
The biggest thing is that you have to stay current on your mortgage payments, and your home equity has to be within the exemption limits set by your state.
Okay, now you said equity.
Yes.
That's the part where I always get a little bit lost.
Sure.
Can you just explain, like, what is equity and how does it play into this whole thing?
So think of home equity as basically a savings account that's tied to your house.
Oh.
So it grows as you pay down your mortgage and as your property value increases. So for example, if your house is worth $250,000 and you have a mortgage of $150,000, you have $100,000 in equity. So it's a portion of your house that you actually own.
Oh, so it's like your investment
It is.
in your house.
Yeah, it's the part that you own free and clear.
Okay.
So,
But you mentioned exemption limits.
right.
What are those and how do they play into it?
So each state has something called homestead exemptions, and it's basically a law that protects a certain amount of the equity in your home from creditors if you were to file for bankruptcy.
Okay.
So in the book, they mention Illinois and Indiana specifically as examples where these laws exist. So essentially, as long as your equity in your home stays under a certain limit, your creditors can't force you to sell your home in order to repay them.
Okay, so there is a safety net there.
There is.
Protecting that equity.
Absolutely.
So what happens if you have a lot of equity?
Mm-hmm.
Like if it goes over that limit, I imagine then things could get a little bit complicated.
It could. If your equity is higher than that exemption limit, then creditors might try to come after that equity to try to recoup some of their losses. So in that case, you might have to consider filing Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which involves a repayment plan in order to protect your home.
Okay, so you have to be strategic about your equity. This book also really emphasizes how one missed mortgage payment can have this like ripple effect.
Oh, for sure.
It's not just one missed payment.
Absolutely not. The book really kind of lays out the dangers of what happens when you miss a mortgage payment, because then you start accruing interest on that missed payment, which then gets added to your principal, so your overall debt gets bigger. And then if you're using an escrow account to pay things like property taxes and insurance, you might end up missing those payments too, so it can really snowball quickly.
So what should you do if you find yourself even a little bit behind? Like what's the first step that you should take?
Well, the first step is definitely to reach out to your lender as soon as possible, because a lot of lenders have what are called hardship programs or modified payment plans that can help you get back on track. But the key is communication, and it has to be early on.
Communication is key.
Ugh.
But what if it's too late for that? What if things have progressed to the point where foreclosure proceedings have begun?
Well, in that case, you might want to consider Chapter 13 bankruptcy, which the book describes as a way to stop the clock on foreclosure.
Oh, wow. So you can actually halt that whole process.
Yes. So when you file for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, it triggers something called an automatic stay, which immediately puts a stop to any foreclosure actions. And it gives you some breathing room to get your finances in order and figure out a plan. And that plan usually involves a Chapter 13 repayment plan, which allows you to catch up on those missed mortgage payments over a period of 3 to 5 years.
Oh, so it's a chance to restructure everything.
It is.
Okay, so it seems like timing is everything.
It is. The longer you wait to take action, the harder it will be to catch up, even with Chapter 13 bankruptcy. So it's really important to act fast, especially when you're facing a situation like foreclosure.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about saving your home, but sometimes it's just not feasible to keep your house.
Right.
The book talks about that too. Like,
Yes.
maybe you have a mortgage that's just way too high or you're facing overwhelming repair costs.
Uh-huh.
What are your thoughts about those kinds of scenarios?
Sometimes walking away from that mortgage just makes the most sense financially. And even though it can be a tough decision, Chapter 7 bankruptcy can help you do that and do it cleanly.
So it lets you just surrender the property and move on.
Yeah. And one of the benefits that the book talks about is that when you file for bankruptcy, you're released from any further responsibility for that debt.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So let's say you owe more on your mortgage than what your house is currently worth.
Oh, so you're underwater.
You're underwater.
Yeah.
And so you go through the whole foreclosure process, but even after your lender takes your house, they could still try to get you to pay the difference between what you owed on the mortgage and what they were able to get from selling the house. It's called a deficiency judgment.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yes, and that can be a huge financial burden.
Oh, gosh.
But when you surrender your home through Chapter 7, you are typically released from that obligation and you get to start fresh.
Oh, wow. That's a big difference.
It is.
Okay. So the book also presents a couple of case studies, which is really helpful.
Right.
And they illustrate the ways that bankruptcy can help homeowners. The first one is the Robertsons.
Yes.
They're a couple who have fallen behind on their mortgage payments due to a sudden medical crisis,
Right.
but they want to keep their home.
Right.
So how do you think bankruptcy could help them?
So based on what we've been talking about, Chapter 13, bankruptcy, seems like it might be a really good option for them
Cool.
because it would allow them to restructure their debt and spread those missed payments out over a longer period of time.
Uh-huh.
And most importantly, it would stop that foreclosure process in its tracks.
Okay. That's really promising.
Yes.
And then there's the Smiths,
Yes.
and they're dealing with a lot of unsecured debt, like credit card bills, medical bills, personal loans, but they've managed to keep up with their mortgage payments.
Yes.
So their problem isn't really saving their home from foreclosure. It's more about getting their overall finances in order.
Absolutely. So in their case, Chapter 7 bankruptcy might be a better fit
Okay.
because it would allow them to eliminate a lot of that unsecured debt and free up their monthly budget so they could have a little more breathing room and financial stability.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. We have two different families facing different challenges, but they can both potentially find a solution.
Absolutely. Each case is different, and it just highlights how bankruptcy can be tailored to meet the specific needs and goals of each individual or each family.
Absolutely. This has been super informative.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on to part 2, is there anything from the book that you think would be interesting for our listeners to kind of ponder?
Well, something that caught my eye in this book is it mentions that a lot of people actually qualify for home loans very soon after filing for bankruptcy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and their credit scores often improve, and their debt-to-income ratios look a lot better after the whole process.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question.
Yeah, we'll have to leave our listeners with that one to think
Oh,
about.
sure.
And for anybody who is listening, just remember that Geraci Law actually offers a free credit counseling course, even if you're not filing for bankruptcy. So you can find that at infotapes.com.
Great resource.
And one last time for anybody who just joined us, this is just for information. It's not legal advice.
Right.
Attorney advertising past results don't guarantee similar outcomes.
Of course.
Listening to this doesn't make you a client of Geraci Law or any of their lawyers.
Right.
And what we talk about is general and might not be right for you.
Yeah.
If you need specific advice about your money or bankruptcy, talk to a qualified attorney.
Right.
Geraci Law does do free consultations.
Absolutely.
So reach out to them if you want to learn more.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, isn't it? Like, it almost seems counterintuitive that bankruptcy could actually help you get a mortgage later on.
Yeah, why would that be?
Well, you have to think when you're carrying a lot of debt, that really weighs down your entire financial picture, and lenders see that as risky. But when you file for bankruptcy and a lot of those debts are wiped out or reorganized, it actually makes you less risky as a borrower.
So it's almost like you're cleaning things up.
Yeah, you're starting fresh.
And it makes you a more appealing borrower.
It does, and it's not just about wiping the slate clean. Bankruptcy often leads to a better debt-to-income ratio, and that's something that lenders look at very closely. How much debt do you have compared to how much money you're bringing in? And so bankruptcy can help you bring those numbers into a more manageable balance, and that makes you much more attractive as a borrower to lenders, even for things like mortgages.
That's really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
I always thought that bankruptcy would be this big red flag for lenders.
Yeah, that's a really common misconception, and the book does a great job of dispelling some of those myths and showing that bankruptcy can really be a path toward a more stable financial future.
So it's not always a setback. Sometimes it can be a turning point.
Absolutely. And something that this book really emphasizes over and over again is the importance of seeking legal advice early on in the process,
Yeah.
especially in a complex area like bankruptcy. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I imagine that bankruptcy law is kind of like a maze
Yeah,
with all of these different rules and
a
procedures.
lot of rules.
And I imagine for the average person trying to navigate that on their own would be incredibly overwhelming.
Very much so. So having an attorney by your side who specializes in bankruptcy is essential. They can really guide you through that maze, help you understand your rights, figure out what the best path for you is, and they can also help you with all the paperwork and represent you in court so you're protected throughout the entire process.
It takes a lot of the stress and uncertainty out of the equation.
Absolutely. And actually, the book mentions that Geraci Law offers free consultations,
Oh, wow, that's great.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
So if you're considering bankruptcy, you can just reach out to them and get some advice without any pressure or obligation.
No pressure. That's a really great first step to take.
It is. It's all about getting informed and figuring out what the best decision is for your individual circumstances. And speaking of choices, the book does a really good job of going into detail about the different types of bankruptcy and how they can be tailored to meet specific situations.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Could you maybe just give us a quick refresher on when each one might be appropriate?
Sure. So, Chapter 7, bankruptcy, is often a good fit for folks who are just overwhelmed with unsecured debt like credit card bills, medical expenses, things like that. And it's a way to get a fresh start by wiping out those rats.
So it's like hitting the reset button on your finances.
It is. And then on the other hand, you have Chapter 13, bankruptcy. And that's often used by people who want to keep their homes but have fallen behind on their mortgage payments. And so it's a way to catch up on those payments and avoid foreclosure.
Okay, so both offer a path to financial stability,
Right.
but they address different challenges.
They do. And that's why it's so crucial to get expert advice from a qualified attorney, because they can help you figure out which one is the right fit for your specific needs and circumstances.
Yeah, and this book does a great job of going into those nuances and highlighting the potential benefits and the considerations you need to think about with each approach. I think it's really empowering for anyone who is considering bankruptcy.
It is. It takes something that a lot of people think is very scary and taboo, and it lays it out there in an approachable, easy to understand way. It empowers readers to take control of their finances and make educated choices about their future.
So it's about education.
Absolutely.
Well, it looks like we've covered a lot of ground today. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that bankruptcy isn't the end of the world.
Yeah.
In fact, in a lot of cases, it's the start of a new chapter, a more financially stable chapter. And so if you're struggling with debt, don't hesitate to seek help and explore your options. There's no shame in it, and it could be the first step toward a brighter financial future.
Yeah, that's a really great point. It's a reminder that there is hope even when things feel really, really tough.
Absolutely. And, for anybody out there who might be considering bankruptcy, Geraci Law offers those free consultations.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And they've got tons of resources to help people make those difficult decisions.
That's great because it can feel so overwhelming sometimes.
Oh, for sure it can.
So to have an expert, to be able to turn to and say, hey, what are my options here? What should I do?
Absolutely. And, the book also makes the point that you don't have to wait until you're like in dire straits, to seek help.
Right.
Sometimes getting advice early on can really prevent things from becoming a much bigger issue.
Yeah, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
That's right.
Right.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed or you just have some questions about your options, don't reach out to an attorney.
Yeah, be proactive.
Be proactive.
Don't wait until it's too late.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, it looks like we've reached the end of our time together today. We covered so much information, from the basics of bankruptcy to some real-life examples of how it can help homeowners who are facing different challenges.
It's been a really great discussion, and I hope that our listeners are walking away feeling more knowledgeable and empowered to make smart choices about their finances.
Me too. And just one last reminder for anybody who's listening, this was for informational purposes only, and it shouldn't be taken as legal advice. Attorney advertising past results don't guarantee similar outcomes, and listening to this doesn't make you a client of Geraci Law or any of their lawyers. The stuff we talked about is general and might not be right for your situation. If you need real advice about your money or bankruptcy, you should talk to a lawyer directly. Geraci Law does those free consultations, so reach out if you want to learn more.
Great advice.
Okay, thanks for joining us on this journey. As we learn more about bankruptcy and home ownership, until next time, stay curious and remember there's always hope for a brighter financial future.